Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are honored to welcome writer and family caregiver, Mary Ellen Spangler. Welcome, Mary Ellen. How are you today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Our pleasure, our pleasure. So, when I introduced you, I said family caregiver, Mary Ellen. Why don't you share with our viewers and listeners what family caregiver was for you and kind of what led you to who you are today?
Yeah. So my role as a caregiver kind of naturally fell into my lap. I was a caregiver from a legal standpoint, primarily for my father. My parents were divorced and I'm the oldest sibling, so it kind of naturally fell into my lap. But I feel like it was the right fit as far as me being prepared to take on that kind of role. So I'm glad that it worked out the way that it did. But essentially, my dad suffered from alcohol-induced dementia. We didn't ever get a clear-cut diagnosis, which is one of the things that I really kick myself for. But without a doctor's official diagnosis, it's still quite clear that what he ended up taking his life was dementia. So that was really the root of it all.
Now, you'd mentioned throughout your life that you'd witnessed your dad's struggles with mental health, particularly after being denied from medical school. How did that experience really shape your perspective on mental illnesses and ultimately influenced your decision to study psychology?
Yeah, I think I would say that was the catalyst for really my education. My dad was a huge proponent of education. He himself had his dual major in biochem, and then he went on to pursue medical school, ultimately was denied. And that was, I think, one of his deepest traumas that really contributed to his mental health decline. I think that things just continued to stack upon each other. But the one thing he did really succeed in for my brother and I was pushing us to be educated. So I think it was kind of a dual situation. He pushed me to get my degree in whatever interested me most, and psychology ended up being the field that interested me the most, kind of as a result of watching him, I guess in a sense, I would say spiral over the years.
When I want to kind of follow up on that. When, for viewers and listeners that don't realize, medical school, yes, it's a long life commitment. It's very intense, but it's also highly competitive. Do you know the factors that led to him not being accepted? Because, he has a biochem degree, dual major. So it's not like, he was just throwing darts and hoping to hit medical school. It sounds like he really prepared for it and, set himself up to succeed. Do you have any backstory into why he may not have been accepted?
Yeah, it's interesting. He had explained that to me at one point. Maybe I may have been 17 or 18, and I had asked him about it. And so he was from Detroit, and so he was applying to local schools in the Detroit area. And as far as I know, I believe he only applied to one or two and was rejected from those. So I think it was a combination of things. His explanation was that he applied at a time where they were looking for more diversity. It was very, it just wasn't inclusive at the time. It was primarily white male doctors. And so I think in his mind, whether it was valid or not is hard to say. In his mind, he thinks that they were just looking for more diversity at the time, and it wasn't a good time for him to apply. I also think that it was truthfully a lack of resilience on his part. I think from what I know of applying to medical school, you really have to follow through and keep trying. You also have to apply to many schools. So I think that played a role as well.
I see. Okay. And for you though, as the oldest, as his daughter, the father-daughter dynamics and relationships. How was witnessing your dad's struggles and those traumatic experiences shaped your understanding of the long-term effects of trauma on individuals, whether it be physical, mental, substance, how did that shape you?
I think it's made me hyper aware of my own circumstances. I know my dad's experience has been a trauma for myself as well,
Sure.
and my mother and my brother. So I think I'm much more cognizant of it than I would have been if I hadn't really witnessed my dad go through what he went through. So I have made sure to put steps in place to make sure I'm taking care of my mental health. I think if there's any silver lining to such a hard situation is that I've been able to learn what not to do and how to take care of myself and make sure that I'm able to heal from the difficulties that I've faced in my life. So for me, that's prioritizing physical exercise, eating healthy, and making sure I'm attending therapy. And with those in place, I think that is giving me a support that unfortunately my dad just didn't have.
So let's go back to childhood. When were you first aware that maybe your dad had something wrong or that he was dealing with these issues?
That's a great question. My childhood was incredibly stable. I'm very grateful for that. So, my dad had a job that required him to travel, usually 5 days a week, and my mom stayed at home with us. So, we had a great routine. But my dad being gone 5 days a week, I think in fact, I know he was able to hide his substance abuse from us for a very long time. And I truthfully don't know when it started. I also know that when my mom started to get inklings of what was going on, she did an excellent job of hiding it from my brother and I. So we went a very long time not knowing, which was a blessing in disguise because we were able to have a pretty normal childhood. The first time that I truly noticed something was wrong was probably when I was around 17 years old. We were sitting at the dinner table. It's a very vivid memory for all three of us, actually. And my dad was telling a story, as he did often. And we laughed, gave him the chuckle that he wanted. And about 5 minutes later, he retells the same story verbatim. And we're all kind of looking at each other, wondering, is he trying to be funny? We were confused. It was very strange. And then maybe 10, 15 minutes later, he told it a third time. And at that point, we all said something to him as far as, do you not realize you just said that twice? And he got defensive, as I've learned is pretty normal for people when they're first suffering from memory loss. They do get defensive because they don't know what's going on. They're frustrated and they're probably likely scared. And so that was kind of the response. And that was the very first time that I thought to myself, something's not right here.
Okay. And now, are you attributing that to memory loss per dementia or memory loss per the alcoholism?
He hadn't had any alcohol that day, so I think that it was the kind of the tip of the iceberg.
Did, in hindsight, do you see other things, other signs that maybe looking back may have happened before that time at the dinner table?
That's a good question. I have thought about that quite a bit. I've tried to mull it over and go back and see if there's anything else I could I don't know, trace back, but I genuinely can't. That was my first experience at 17. So
Okay.
yeah, and then it was a really fast spiral from there. It was like the moment that we all really felt like something was truly wrong, it was about 2 to 2.5 years before he was homeless and suffering far more than I ever could have imagined. So as far as progression, it was pretty rapid.
Pretty rapid. Did his employer, did they ever have any concerns? Because I'm imagining, you said oftentimes he's gone 4 or 5 days traveling for work, and here you're 17, and you guys are just noticing it at a casual dinner conversation. How was his job suffering at all?
That's a good question as well, because that's not something that my mom ever filled me in on. And I don't think that my dad ever expressed any of that to her. I guarantee that that was the case though, because an intricate part of my dad's job was taking clients or prospective clients to dinner, and that usually involved alcohol. And so I would be more than willing to bet that clients had noticed some repetition or some things that just felt off. We don't know for sure, but it's more than likely based off of what we saw. And then as far as his job, getting official notice that he was dealing with substance abuse was when he took a leave of absence to attend rehab. And he did that for about, I want to say about a month. He took a leave of absence and then just never went back, because that was when things started to get really, really bad.
How long was it after that conversation at the dinner table that he did go into rehab?
I want to say it was in the next few months. It was pretty quick.
Very quick. Okay. Let's talk.
Yeah.
Let's talk about let's talk about you though. How are you coping as a 17-year-old girl who's watching her dad have cope with these issues and getting ready to enter adulthood yourself, imagining going off to college fairly soon after. How are you coping with an emotional toll of seeing your dad deteriorate and having to cope with those challenges and just being there also to support him too as your dad? That's a lot.
It was a lot. And I think at 17, I just wasn't prepared to deal with it. So what I ended up doing at that time was making myself scarce. I really stayed away from the home as much as possible when he was around. I think it was truthfully just too painful to deal with, to just watch someone you love kind of just spiral and turn into someone that you don't recognize. It's really scary, especially at that age. I'm sure if the situation had been happening now or even a few years later, it would have been different. But at that point, I try to remind myself I was just a kid. At 17, you are still a child. And so for me, I just wanted to be as far away from it as I could have been.
In the same, special relationships that daughters have with fathers and daughters have with mothers, you know, your brother's younger than you by how many years? A lot, or
3 years.
three? How is he kind of contemplating what he's seeing dad go through? How did he manage it? And I don't want you to, necessarily speak for him, but just the dynamic of, what the two of you were experiencing. How was he handling it at 14 years old?
He he was forced to face it a little more head on because he didn't have the freedom that I had at my age of 17, having a car and being able to go and do. He was stuck at home, so he got the brunt of that. And that's something that's definitely influenced him to this day. I could not be more proud of the way that he turned out, because it was one of those situations where he was dealing with a sick dad with a lot of anger at such a formative age. And rather than let that negatively impact him, he went and attended nursing school, and now he's a registered nurse working in the ER, and he's helping people. And I feel like, truthfully, my dad's situation was fuel to the fire for him, and he used it as a catalyst to make sure that he is able to help people, because he was at an age where he just couldn't help my dad. He wouldn't have known what to do at 14. So he's making up for it now, that's for sure.
That's wonderful. Congratulations to him and to you. Let's touch briefly on mom. Now, as a spouse, there's another special relationship, one that's obviously much different than when you're the child. How is mom
Right.
dealing and coping with all this? And, I'm assuming she's finding out all of this all of a sudden, like the two of you were. How did she manage through this?
Yeah, I think it was a shell shock for her as well, because my dad had done such a good job of hiding it from all of us. But my mom had kind of adjusted to being two parents throughout my childhood. So we were lucky in the way that when my dad stepped out of our lives, not intentionally, but as a result of his illness, she was able to continue with what she had been doing, really taking care of two kids in a household entirely by herself. But she was an intricate part of helping me through all the processes that I had to go through later on. Legal entities wouldn't really speak with her because they were divorced. So it did fall on me, but if there was anything she could do to help, she was so quick to do it. Whether that was coming with me to Social Security appointments or speaking with lawyers or whatever we had to do, she was ready to be there, with as much involvement as she was allowed, really. So.
If you don't mind me asking, how long was it that they separated from that time you were 17 at that dinner table to dad entering rehab to then ultimately, the homelessness? How long was it before they had separated?
So she had prepared to stick alongside him as he entered rehab. Of course, she was ready to support him, as was I. And unfortunately, he just couldn't follow through. And so, for her own mental health, she had to set boundaries. So, when he completed rehab and then ultimately relapsed pretty quick after, that was the time when she said, I can't be in the marriage anymore because it's affecting myself as well as the kids. And she made the right call. I don't doubt that for a second. In fact, I told her once that I applauded her for sticking around so long because it was hard to deal with. And she really had three people to take care of now rather than just two. And that's not easy to cope with. So I would say it was within a couple months after his failed rehab that she had to sever ties.
So once dad got out of rehab and then like you said, he quickly relapsed, is that when the homelessness began?
Yes. So at that point, she had asked him to leave the home. And because he traveled so much for work, he had countless hotel points. So he was able to stay in hotels for quite a while. I want to say it was 3 or 4 months.
Um,
But when the hotel points ran out, that was when he just went straight to the streets. And it was shocking to witness. I didn't have much involvement with him at that point for my own protection, nor did my mom or brother. And I can't remember who saw him first, but we live in a small town. And so one of us was driving and saw him on the side of the road carrying a trash bag, looking unclean. And it was just one of the craziest experiences, not something you ever expect from a man who's highly educated and on paper has a pretty perfect life, a family that loves him, a great job, a nice home. And
right.
it just is a testament to how powerful mental illness and disease can be.
Absolutely. So at that point, how old were you, Mary Ellen?
At that point, I want to say I was 19. I
Okay.
may have just turned 20.
But this is all within a 2, 3 year period that you went from
Yeah.
having family dinner to someone seeing dad walking down the street homeless.
Yes.
That's a pretty remarkable transition of events, really. How did you cope with being able to navigate those complexities of finding him while he was living on the streets? Then I'm assuming you then kind of went and took the lead on, being the interventionist, if you will, in helping did you find him placement? Did you get some resources? Like, what was that period like for you?
Yeah. So he was on the streets for about 4 years. And I say the streets, but he did bounce back and forth in and out of a shelter in the area in Roseville. It was called the Gathering Inn. And they did take good care of him there. From what I understood, they would bus people to different spots to sleep at night. But he did meet someone there, someone that took advantage of him and ended up taking him to Southern California. So the time that passed between when he was first on the streets to when I was able to find him placement in a boarding care was about 4 years. So he was homeless for quite a while. And really the way that it all worked out was thanks to a crisis center in Southern California. They are called Interval House. And a woman there, she was as close to an angel as a human could possibly be. She reached out to me on social media because she said my dad would talk about us, the kids, and I have a pretty unique name. Someone my age named Mary Ellen. There's not too many of us. So she was able to find me pretty quickly, which was very fortunate. And so when I received the message from her, it said something along the lines of, I know your dad. I've been working with him and this other man, and I'm really concerned. I think something is going on aside from the homelessness, because of course she works at a crisis shelter. She felt like there was something deeper going on. So it was really her that got our attention and got us to come down to Southern California and get some things in place to get him a home, because he needed a home. He was so far gone at that point that he, if we had just left him the way that he was going to die soon.
When you say she felt like there was something more going on, is she referring to dementia, or is she talking about this other person who was taking advantage of Dad? What did that mean necessarily?
Yes. So she was referring to the man that my dad was with, because he was homeless, but he had no mental illness as far as anything that prevented him from being a fully functioning human. I'm sure he had substance abuse issues as well, but he was taking advantage of my dad. So it was a tangled web. We had to get Adult Protective Services involved, and the Huntington Beach Police, and it was another kind of hard to believe situation. It was hard to believe that it was real, but the root of it is that he had ended up tricking my dad into signing a power of attorney. So he was able to drain my dad's pension, his bank accounts. He was able to open credit cards in his name. And that was something that I wasn't aware could even happen. And that's something that's really important to me now to share with people, as far as cognizant people taking advantage of those with dementia financially, because it is abuse. And it's sad that this probably happens far more than I have any idea about.
Right. When you talk about the dementia, when was he officially diagnosed with having the dementia?
That diagnosis didn't take place until he was back home up in Northern California with us. And at that time, I think I was 25 years old. So it came much, much later than I would have liked. It was one of those things where we were trying to Google and diagnose. And to this day, we still don't have a 100% official diagnosis. A doctor had told us that she thought that it was, it's called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, which is alcohol-induced dementia. So
what do you think the failure for getting that diagnosis, or at least the assumption of that diagnosis, was? Because you're talking about an 8-year period of time at this point.
Yes.
What do you attribute that to?
I think it was the system just kind of pushing him through and not seeking a larger answer. And at that time, I didn't know to advocate for him and to push. So I just kind of accepted it.
Yeah. And that's the real sad, unfortunate part. You don't know what you don't know. We just did an interview yesterday, which will be airing here soon, with a doctor. And the whole premise of the interview was people don't know what they don't know. I mean, whether you're 30 or 16 or 25, it shouldn't fall on you to be diagnosing for the healthcare professionals, and that's why I was just curious, and in my head, I'm assuming that's probably what she's going to say, is that they probably saw your dad and they had a preconceived notion, and, it's alcohol and, homeless, all these unfortunate things, rather than let's find the root of the issue with this person so that we can at least help support them the best that we can.
Right.
So you've been through a lot in the very short period of time. How did you handle the anger, the frustration, the hurt, the sadness, while you're also seeing, your father being taken advantage of by another person, your father's homelessness, and, also watching the deteriorating health that, your father had? I mean, that's a lot to go through.
It was really hard. I went back and forth. Some days I would be so angry and just resent him. Other days I would be heartbroken and think to myself, why were my brother and I not enough to keep him healthy and wanting to be in our lives? So I flipped back and forth. Then some days I would be grateful that he was alive and that we found him. Other days I would be heartsick thinking about him in the board and care because he didn't know the people. And that was another challenge that we faced. And again, something that I didn't know about is how difficult it is to keep caregivers in board and cares. He his caregivers changed hands almost every time we visited him. There were different people there. And so I felt a lot of guilt leaving him in a situation with people that he didn't know, and he never really had a chance to adjust to them. But then at the same time, he didn't know who he was half the time, and it was something that I really struggled to grapple with, because I think in my head I still was thinking of my dad as he was rather than who he became, really.
Right. How have you worked through some of those feelings? And you mentioned that you had some guilt. How did you reconcile all those feelings with the knowledge that you did do everything that you could have done within your power as, as a minor at 17 and then later as an adult?
A lot of therapy. I'm so grateful for my psychology background because it pushed me to seek professional help, and that has helped me work through a lot of the challenges that I just don't think I could have worked through on my own. I'm also incredibly grateful for my writing. I've been able to kind of give myself a form of therapy by sharing my thoughts, and then connecting with people and sharing stories and kind of discussing situations with other people that have been in similar situations. I don't think anyone will ever have a carbon copy of what we went through, but knowing that we're not alone and that there are other people out there that are facing the same challenges that we have, provides a sense of solidarity, I guess.
Sure. Sure. How is how do you view the situation that you and your brother went through, and likewise your mother? Do you feel like you would have gone into psychology, your brother would have gone into nursing had it not been for your experience with your dad?
I don't think so, to be honest. I think that we are a direct result of this situation. I mean, he was one of the most important people in our lives, and losing him impacted us in more ways than I'm sure we even realize. And so I think we ended up where we were supposed to be as a result of losing him.
What, and if you don't mind me asking, and you sent us a tremendous story, and we're going to have to figure out how to get this story tied into your interview with us, because it's not a simple, YouTube description or podcast description, but I think it's something everybody that is listening or watching this needs to read. You talk about your wedding day, and for most girls, their wedding day is one of the biggest days of their lives, maybe next to, childbirth. What was that experience like for you when you go to walk down the aisle and it's your brother walking you down the aisle and not your dad? And I know you mentioned that you felt like your dad was there, but walk us through what that walk down the aisle was like with your brother on your arm.
It was bittersweet, because I had known I had about a decade to prepare, knowing that he would never walk me down the aisle. And so, but I just don't think any amount of time is enough to really prepare you. And so it was bittersweet in that not having him was so painful, and it was like a piece of the puzzle was missing. But I am also so grateful to have my brother, who has, especially now that he's older, has stepped in and have become a really strong male figure in my life. And of course, he's younger, so he can never be a father figure, but he's done an excellent job of just taking on that male role in my life, aside from my husband. And so I was grateful that I had him, at least. So
And again, if you don't mind me asking this, and if you'd rather not answer it, that's okay too, Mary Ellen. We absolutely respect that because this is a very personal story. What was your last days visiting with Dad like? Was there anything that stands out about those memories, and how did Dad remember and know you until ultimately he passed?
Yeah, that's something that one of my biggest lessons in all of this is that I didn't know hardly anything about dementia. I understood it at a very surface level as far as the memory loss. I did not understand how it manifests in the body. And so when he was close to passing, which was now it's been about a year and a half, when he was on hospice, it was the most painful part of the entire experience was watching him like that. I just didn't understand the mechanics of when your dementia is that far progressed, your body no longer is able to eat, swallow. And so watching him be essentially a skeleton was just um, the most painful thing I have ever endured. And so part of me didn't even want to see him at the end. And I visited him far less than I probably should have. But selfishly, I just wanted to preserve the image of my dad healthy in my mind and not have this image of him so sick burned in my brain. And so that's something that I still struggle with a little bit is how I didn't visit him every day like I wish I had, but it's just heartbreaking to see someone to that degree of dementia. They're just not themselves, physical or mental.
Was he able to still recognize or know you? No.
No, I would say he stopped knowing who I was post COVID. So it was a couple years of him not knowing who I was. And so that was really hard. It was kind of interesting because he would have the ability to recall really distant memories. Like he would bring up his mom, my grandmother, or he would bring up his childhood dog. But he didn't have memories of my mom or my brother and I, which was just really interesting.
Yeah.
The brain is fascinating, so I don't know why that was, but
Did Dad have any brothers and sisters?
he didn't. He was an only child, so
Okay.
another reason that it kind of fell on me.
Sure.
There was no one else.
How did now your brother does he have any special memories from Dad at the end when he was visiting, or was he able to visit as much? Because I'm imagining he's in nursing school at that time.
Yeah, so he actually attended nursing school in Ohio. So he wasn't in the area, so he didn't get to see my dad at all. And truthfully, I think that that was for the best. And I don't think he has any regrets about it. And I certainly don't think that he should have any because as someone that was there, and my mom as well, it's something that we think about all the time, and it's not good memories of him. And so I'm grateful that my brother has some preserved memories of him in a healthier state. I can't say healthy, of course, but healthier.
Right. Absolutely. And I just want to close with a last question because it does happen, but it's not as common where young adults, children even, are put into this role, and oftentimes it's very unexpectedly. Is there one thing or a couple of things that you would want to share with other young people that might be listening or watching this who might be in, like you said, not a carbon situation, but very similar? And what would those things be?
I think my most powerful piece of advice, especially for young people, would be to just speak up. Even if you think it's a silly question, even if you think people won't take you seriously, just speak up and ask questions. and don't be afraid to use your voice, because I certainly was. And if I could go back in time, I would have used my voice far more than I did. So I think not being afraid to, I guess, step on toes, if you will. I wish I had pushed for a diagnosis. I wish I had, gosh, I would have loved to get a brain scan of him. I wish I could have asked more questions about medication. I just took it at face value as far as prescriptions, and just let them do their thing. And of course, I trust medical professionals, but I think that I should have had more input. And so that's what I would suggest to anyone that might be in a situation similar to myself, is just speak up.
Yeah, and don't be intimidated by the white coat, because, you know, and this is for even older adults, you know, they far too often, and again, it's not it's not to speak begrudgingly against the healthcare system or the healthcare professionals, but, you know, you have one person to take care of, they have many people to take care of. And sometimes they just take for granted that you don't have a question, or that there's no questions to be asked, and they're ready to move on. If you don't know about something, if you're unsure about something, speak up and use your voice, because otherwise they can't answer it and you won't be heard. And I think that's great advice, Mary Ellen. And I just think, you know, the work you're doing and the advocacy, hopefully you'll be doing more of it, because I think your story is one that will resonate with many people and is so deserving to be shared and heard. Because again, you know, caregivers are often the silent majority, because they are afraid to speak up. They don't know what they don't know. And, you know, you're already at a deficit, because oftentimes it happens very unexpectedly, and next you're just thrust into it. And you have to do the best that you can, like, you know, you had done and your mom and brother have done. And we just applaud you and admire you and thank you for sharing your story and for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a great day, and give your best to your brother and mom for us.
Thank you so much. Will do.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms, or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Mary Ellen Spangler for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.